Ой.
Before Summer Wells became the center of one of America's most discussed missing child cases, she was just a 5-year-old little girl growing up in the hills of eastern Tennessee. Summer Moon Utah Wells was small for her age, with short blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and endless energy. According to her family, she could switch personalities in seconds. One moment acting like a princess, the next running through the dirt with her older brothers, like she was trying to keep up with all of them at once. She loved being outside, loved flowers, loved following her brothers around the property. Candace Wells once described Summer as the boss of the house, the one always trying to keep the boys in line. The Wells family lived on Ben Hill Road in Beech Creek, a rural part of Hawkins County where homes sat deep in the woods and neighbors could be separated by long stretches of narrow mountain roads. Their property spread across steep land, surrounded by trees and cluttered with old vehicles, scrap piles, trailers, broken equipment, and partially collapsed structures collected over the years. It was isolated, not hidden exactly, but easy to overlook from the outside. Summer lived there with her parents, Dawn and Candace Wells, and her 3 older brothers, Josiah, Wyatt, and Waylon. Candace's mother, known online as Grandus, stayed in a camper just a short distance from the main house. Life inside the family often appeared chaotic, but also familiar in the way many struggling rural households can appear familiar. Church services, long workdays, kids running across the property, arguments that came and went, relatives constantly nearby. At the same time, the family carried a complicated history long before Summer disappeared. There had been prior involvement with child services in multiple states. Dawn Wells had a history of arrests and domestic violence allegations. Financial problems, instability, and conflict inside the household were not entirely new. Yet, despite that history, people close to the family also described Summer as deeply loved by her parents and especially close to her brothers. And in the days leading up to June 15th, 2021, life around the Wells property appeared to continue moving normally. The day before Summer vanished, Child Services had briefly visited the home following a complaint involving the children. The case was reportedly closed without any removals. Then came June 15th. That morning, Summer spent the day riding around with her mother and grandmother through eastern Tennessee. At one point, they stopped at Horse Pond, where photos and short videos captured Summer swimming and playing in the water beneath the summer heat. By late afternoon, the family had returned home to Ben Hill Road. At first, nothing about the day appeared unusual enough to suggest it would soon become the center of a national missing child investigation. But later, investigators would spend years trying to reconstruct the timeline inside that house, minute by minute, room by room, after Summer Wells seemingly disappeared somewhere between a normal summer afternoon and the moment the panic began. June 15th, 2021 began like an ordinary summer day around the Wells property in Beech Creek. That morning, Candace Wells drove her mother to a medical appointment for ongoing knee pain. Summer came along for the ride, sitting quietly in the vehicle as they traveled through eastern Tennessee. At some point during the afternoon, they also picked up a 15-year-old family friend named Hunter. Later, the group stopped at Horse Pond. Photos and short videos from that afternoon would later spread across the internet. Summer swimming in the water, laughing, climbing around the rocks, looking like a normal 5-year-old enjoying the middle of summer. Nothing in those images suggested that within hours, she would disappear. By late afternoon, everyone had returned to the property on Ben Hill Road. According to the timeline later given by the family, Summer spent part of the evening near the house, with Candace and her grandmother planting flowers. Then, at some point, she went back inside. The details after that become harder to pin down clearly. Family members later described Summer going downstairs into the basement area to play. Hunter was still at the property. Summer's brothers were inside the home as well. Multiple people were present on the land during the hours before she vanished. And yet, no one could ever fully explain the exact moment the timeline changed. At approximately 6:30 p.m., the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office received a call that Summer Wells was missing. According to the family, she had been playing downstairs and then suddenly could not be found anywhere on the property. The first deputies arrived to a scene that immediately felt difficult to understand. There were no obvious signs of forced entry, no confirmed sounds of a struggle, no clear trail showing where Summer may have gone after leaving the house. Search teams moved quickly through the property and surrounding woods as daylight began fading across the Tennessee hills. Neighbors joined the search. Flashlights swept through steep terrain, overgrown paths, abandoned vehicles, and thick tree lines surrounding the home. But as the hours passed, one detail continued bothering both investigators and the public following the case. How does a 5-year-old disappear from a house and property filled with people without anyone being able to clearly explain when she was last seen? That question would continue shaping the investigation for years afterward, because the deeper investigators looked into the timeline inside the Wells home that evening. The harder it became to place every movement, conversation, and memory into one version of events that fully aligned. By the night of June 15th, the search around the Wells property had already expanded far beyond a local missing child call. Deputies moved through the woods surrounding Ben Hill Road with flashlights, while volunteers searched steep hillsides, creek beds, and narrow trails disappearing into the Tennessee forest. The terrain immediately created problems. Thick vegetation, unstable ground, abandoned structures, and deep wooded areas made visibility difficult even during daylight. Just after midnight on June 16th, authorities issued an endangered child alert for Summer Wells. By the following afternoon, the case had escalated into a statewide Amber Alert. And as national attention grew, so did the scale of the search. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation joined the case. The FBI became involved. Search and rescue teams tracking dogs, drones, horseback crews, and eco-search volunteers began covering miles of rural land surrounding the Wells. Property. Old mine areas, ponds, creeks, sheds, and heavily wooded slopes were searched repeatedly over the following days. But investigators continued running into the same problem. There was very little physical evidence pointing clearly in any direction. No confirmed abduction scene, no verified trail leading away from the property. No publicly identified blood evidence or DNA pointing investigators toward a specific explanation for what happened to Summer. And while the searches continued, the timeline inside the house became the center of increasing scrutiny. Investigators interviewed family members multiple times. Candace Wells described the afternoon one way. Other details from people present that day sometimes appeared less consistent as interviews continued. Hunter, the 15-year-old who had spent part of the day with the family, later gave his own account publicly. None of the discrepancies alone clearly explained Summer's disappearance. But together, they created a timeline investigators continued revisiting for years afterward. Then, near the end of June 2021, another detail briefly pulled public attention in a new direction. Authorities asked for information about an older model, red Toyota Tacoma, reportedly seen in the area around the time Summer disappeared. The truck was eventually located, but no major public breakthrough followed. By July, search operations began scaling back in size, though tips continued pouring in from across the country. More than 1,000 leads were reviewed as online discussion around the case exploded. At the same time, public attention increasingly shifted toward the Wells family themselves. In interviews, Dawn and Candace Wells strongly denied involvement in their daughter's disappearance and agreed to polygraph examinations that authorities later said showed no clear signs of deception. Still, public debate surrounding the family only intensified as media appearances and online speculation continued growing. That attention reached a national audience in November 2021, when Dawn and Candace appeared on Dr. Phil to discuss the case publicly. Millions watched the interviews, analyzing body language, inconsistencies, and emotional reactions in real time online. Some viewers believed the parents were being unfairly judged during an unimaginable crisis. Others felt the interviews raised even more questions about the timeline inside the house that evening. Meanwhile, the investigation itself continued moving forward without a definitive breakthrough. In the months after Summer vanished, Dawn Wells was arrested on a DUI charge unrelated to the disappearance. Child Services later removed the Wells boys from the home. Search operations continued through different seasons, including additional winter searches conducted when reduced vegetation made the terrain easier to examine. Years passed. Prayer vigils were held. Age-progressed photos of Summer were released. New leads occasionally surfaced, including a heavily discussed tip in Greenville in late 2025. But none of it produced the answer investigators were still searching for. By 2026, nearly 5 years after Summer Wells disappeared, the case remained officially open. The TBI continued stating publicly that no possibility had been fully ruled out, including an accident, an abduction, or the possibility that events inside the home played a larger role than initially understood. And that uncertainty is part of what has kept the case so heavily debated for years. Because despite massive searches, national media attention, thousands of tips, and endless public theories, investigators still have not been able to fully reconstruct what happened during the final hours. Summer Wells was known to be inside that house on Ben Hill Road. As the years passed without an arrest, a body, or a clear explanation, the disappearance of Summer Wells slowly turned into something else entirely. A case people argued about endlessly because no theory ever seemed to explain everything. Every explanation sounds possible at first, until you reach the part that doesn't fit. For Dawn and Candace Wells, the answer has always been straightforward. They believe Summer was abducted. According to the family, Summer went downstairs to play, and sometime during those missing minutes, someone took her from the property. Supporters of that theory point out how isolated Ben Hill Road really was. No nearby surveillance cameras, long wooded driveways, steep terrain, a property where someone familiar with the area could potentially move in and out without being noticed immediately. And for a while, public attention focused heavily on the possibility of a suspicious vehicle in the area. An older model, red Toyota Tacoma, reportedly seen near the time Summer disappeared. But even people open to the abduction theory keep coming back to the same problem. How does someone remove a child from a property filled with people in the middle of the afternoon without leaving behind a clear witness, physical evidence, or a reliable timeline? Then there's the second theory, the one many locals quietly discussed almost immediately after Summer vanished. What if she wandered away on her own? The land surrounding the Wells property was dangerous. Thick woods, sharp drops, water, old structures, hidden areas difficult to search completely. Some believe Summer may have slipped away unnoticed and suffered an accident somewhere beyond the property line. At first, that explanation sounded realistic to many people following the case, until the searches kept turning up nothing. Search dogs, volunteers, eco-search teams, helicopters, repeated searches across different seasons. Yet no confirmed clothing, remains, or physical trace of Summer was ever publicly recovered from the surrounding area. And that absence pushed more attention toward the theory people remain the most divided over. That something happened inside the house. Not necessarily a planned murder, not necessarily even intentional, but possibly an accident, injury, overdose, or moment of violence that spiraled into panic afterward. People who believe that theory often point to the same uncomfortable details. The changing timelines, the uncertainty around who last saw Summer, the number of adults and children present that day, and the fact that no one has ever been able to clearly reconstruct the final verified movements inside the home before the 911 call. Others strongly push back against that idea. They argue there is still no publicly known forensic evidence connecting Summer's family to her disappearance. No charges, no body, no confession, no physical proof showing what happened inside that house. And that's the detail that keeps this case trapped in debate year after year. Every theory leaves something behind that refuses to fully connect. If Summer was abducted, why has no credible evidence of an outsider ever surfaced? If she wandered away, how did such massive searches fail to uncover even a trace of her? And if something happened inside the Wells home, how has nobody broken after years of national attention, federal involvement, and public scrutiny? That's why the case still feels unresolved in a way many missing child investigations eventually don't. Because nearly every person who looks closely at the disappearance of Summer Wells eventually arrives at the same feeling. Something about the timeline inside that house does not fully make sense. The problem is that no one has ever been able to prove exactly which part of it is wrong.
Hold on for a minute.
No, I want to go.
These are tough questions.
No, I'm being interrogated again, and I don't want to do this anymore. Yes, I am. No, I want out, and I want to go home. I don't want to.
For most people following the Summer Wells case, the investigation no longer lives in search helicopters or police press conferences. It lives in a few scattered pieces of footage that the internet still refuses to let go of. A little girl asleep in the back seat of a truck beside two milk jugs. Summer laughing in the water at Horse Pond. A child with dirt on her hands helping plant flowers outside a house in the Tennessee hills. Those moments have been replayed millions of times. Not because they contain answers, but because people keep hoping they missed something the first time. Some detail, some sound, some small movement that could explain how a 5-year-old child seemed to disappear between one ordinary moment and the next. But the videos always end in the same place. Summer is still there. The timeline still appears normal, and then suddenly years of uncertainty begin. That may be why this case unsettles people differently than many other missing child investigations. There was no clear breaking point, no obvious moment where the entire story changed. Just an afternoon that slowly became impossible to fully explain afterward. And over time, that uncertainty started creating its own kind of psychological weight around the case. People stopped asking only where Summer Wells was. They started asking how so many small details from the same day could still feel so unresolved after years of attention, interviews, and investigation. How long was Summer alone? Who actually saw her last? Why does the timeline still feel slightly different every time it gets retold? Even now, online discussions continue dissecting tiny pieces of the case. Old interviews, pauses during conversations, conflicting memories about the afternoon, the layout of the basement, the timing between phone calls, and the 911 report. Not because any single detail proves what happened, but because the case still feels like it's missing one piece that would suddenly make everything else connect. Meanwhile, life outside the investigation kept moving forward in uncomfortable ways. Summer's brothers grew older. Son Ben Hill Road remained standing. The woods surrounding the property changed with the seasons over and over again. But Summer herself never moved forward with any of it. Instead, she remains frozen at 5 years old in the public memory, always smiling in old photographs, always sitting quietly in that final truck video, always existing in the last ordinary hours before the timeline stopped making sense. And maybe that's the detail people struggle with most after all these years. Not simply that Summer Wells disappeared, but that after nearly 5 years of theories, searches, interviews, and national attention, the case still feels less like a completed story and more like a moment that was interrupted, with the most important part somehow missing from the middle.
Okay, watching TV, where's Summer?
Summer, she was with me.
Okay, so walk me through that.
All right, well, we walked up in here and we got Josie, Wyatt, and Waylon, the boys.
Right,
Well,
you put the groceries down, right?
Yeah, well, we went back out and then we brought the groceries in and put them down. And then Mom, she went and took her stuff to her house, put her stuff away.
Okay,
And then, of course, me and Summer went back over, put our stuff away.
okay. You went back in.
Yeah, me and Summer went back in the house. And then we were just doing normal stuff
Okay,
around the house like we normally do. And I come out, Mom was sitting there at the time I come out and I'm standing here. I
okay.
was like, what are you doing? What are you staring at? She's like, these plants, I gotta get them transplanted. I was like, well, Summer will help us, so I went back in. By that time, she was sitting on the floor playing with her toys.
Right here?
No, in the kitchen where we were just at.
Okay.
She was actually sitting on the floor playing with her toys at that time. I said, Summer, you want to help plant flowers? And she jumped up, left her toys a mess, of course. That's cool.
Yeah,
Then we
well,
walked
that's
over
what
here.
kids do. It's their job,
What?
okay?
We
Get-
walked over here and we transplanted these cactuses from the little pots that they were in. And transplanted these ones here into this bigger pot and that one into that bigger pot. And she took the rocks that we've gotten from different gem mines when we went up to Gatlinburg and stuff.
Okay,
And she's the one that spreaded all the rocks around in here. And then she put her puppies in here. She wanted Chase in there, you know.
okay.
That was cool.
Where are those puppies now?
What do you mean?
Oh, the little
The
puppies,
little-
her ruins.
Yeah, these little.
Oh, yeah, those little guys. Oh, that's Paw Patrol.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the police one.
Yep, that's Chase. He's always on the case.
Okay. Okay.
And we went
Oh,
in
I see another one over
Yep,
here.
she put him in there. Yep, you're on the cactus.
Okay. Don't take those out, okay?
No, I leave him right there.
I know.
And then we went in my mom's where we can't get in there. It's
Yeah,
locked
that's
up.
fine. Went in
So
there.
we went in there and got some candy and stuff she gets from grandma.
Okay.
And I said, well, I'm going to go back over to the house. She wanted to go back, so I figured I'd go back, you know.
Okay.
And I brought her, I literally walked over to here. Like literally walked right to here where I could see the boys and on the kitchen table.
Got him.
And I watched her walk in there. And afterwards, when she was already in there, I walked over and said, quiet. And he looked at me and I said, watch Sissy, I'll be right back. And that's when I walked back over to my mom's.
Okay.
And I was fixing her brace and stuff like that. And I said, well, Mom, I got to go back over with the kids. And that's when I come back up into the house
Okay.
with the boys.
Okay.
Not that.
You walked into the house.
I walked into here. Get up. Get up. I walked in here and them three were sitting right here in front with their eyes glued to the TV. Like always. And I said, boys, where's your sister at? Well, she just went downstairs, Mom, to play. So I went over here like this, because this is where the stairs are.
Okay.
It's actually down under there.
Oh, down into her
Down into
bedroom.
our bedroom, and then hers is on the other side.
Oh, okay, in the basement.
Yeah, in the basement.
Well, this makes sense now, see?
And then I yelled, I said, Summer, Summer. And she didn't, I listened for a minute, I didn't hear nothing. So I went like this, because this is how I always get down here.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you want to come down here or not.
Do I got to be tiny to get in
No,
there?
you should
Can we come in from the other side?
Well, we can, but it'd make more sense if you went this way.
Okay, I'll follow you. Oh, man.
Chris, as we're watching your video here, this is the entrance to Summer's bedroom?
Yeah, this is the entrance, Vinny. It's underneath like a little shelf in the kitchen. And it's cut out from that shelf, and a set of stairway goes down to the basement.
Wow. Okay, so you're coming down into the basement here with Summer's mom. What are you thinking as you're looking at all this and seeing this for the first time?
I was in shock. But the old homicide detective in me kicked in, where it's like,
Nearly 5 years after Summer Wells disappeared, the case remains officially open. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation still receives tips. Age-progressed images of Summer continue circulating online. From time to time, new leads briefly reignite public attention. A possible sighting, a renewed search area, another theory spreading across social media. But so far, none of it has answered the question investigators have been asking since June 15, 2021. What actually happened to Summer Wells after she walked back inside that house? Authorities have repeatedly stated that no scenario has ever been fully ruled out. Abduction, accident, family involvement. Investigators continue treating the case as active, even after years, without a confirmed breakthrough. And despite how much public discussion surrounds the disappearance, the reality underneath it remains painfully simple. A 5-year-old child is still missing. Over the years, Summer's face has become recognizable far beyond Tennessee. People who never stepped foot in Beech Creek still recognize the blonde little girl from the truck video. They recognize the basement photos, the age-progressed sketches, the headlines asking the same unanswered questions over and over again. But for the people closest to the case, this was never just an internet mystery. It was birthdays without Summer, holidays with an empty space at the table, a childhood that stopped halfway through and never restarted. And maybe that's why this case continues lingering so heavily with so many people. Because even after all the theories, arguments, interviews, and media coverage, the core mystery still feels disturbingly small and human at its center. A child was reportedly inside her home one afternoon, surrounded by family, and then somehow vanished so completely that years later, investigators still cannot clearly explain where the timeline broke apart. If Summer Wells is still alive somewhere, someone may recognize something investigators missed years ago. And if she isn't, then somewhere out there, a missing piece of the story still exists, one capable of finally explaining what happened during those final hours on Ben Hill Road. Until then, the case remains suspended between possibilities, not solved, not forgotten, just unfinished. And maybe that's why people still keep coming back to it, because deep down, most of us believe that stories involving children are supposed to end with answers. But Summer Wells never got one. If you've followed this case before, or if there's a detail you believe people still overlook, let me know your thoughts below. And if you want more deep dives into unresolved disappearances and true crime cases like this one, subscribe and stay with us for the next investigation.